Now,
section with Steve Helfer, and I am repeating the show because during the middle of the show we had a fire alarm here at CCTV. So whether it's worth it or not, I don't know, but I am going to do the show over again from the top, as they say. So if you watched it before, you may not want to watch it again, but for posterity and the YouTube channel, I think I'm going to do the show again. Sometimes I was talking to a woman last night who is involved with the Cambridge Health Alliance. She's a very nice woman named Roberta, and I was talking to her about what Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights is all about, because according to her, she really thinks smoking is bad, and I could certainly understand that given the climate that we've been in for the last 30 or 40 years. But what I tried to explain to her is that even if smoking is bad, whatever that means, how far does one go in terms of discrimination in employment, housing, taxation on that group of people in society who smoke? And they're almost, well, they're certainly close to 20% of adult Americans continue to smoke. And these people have a right, a human right, to be able to access medical care, access medical insurance, find employment, and find housing, and find recreation. And yet, more and more, it seems that the government and the anti-smoking, which is deeply, deeply embedded in federal and state government, seems almost no longer to care about the reducing smoking rates. It seems that their primary goal has been to punish that percentage of the population who continue to smoke. And one of the ways they're doing this is through discrimination in employment. And so for years, the Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has contrived data and disseminated this data that would encourage our employers to be leery about hiring smokers. Smokers are less productive. Smokers cost their medical insurance more. This, that, and the other thing. These are deliberately contrived, in my opinion, to encourage employment discrimination against smokers. And of course, this employment discrimination against people who smoke does not just affect the people who smoke, but it affects their families, particularly if the breadwinner is a smoker. If you refuse to hire someone who smokes and who has dependent children or a spouse that's dependent, then you are not only punishing the smoker, but you are punishing the entire family. And if any, the kind of people who are sanguine about these kinds of policies and the kinds of people who implement them, and the kinds of people in the government and in the anti-smoking community who actually are encouraging employers to do, it's a very unusual kind of person, certainly not a live and let live kind of person. And this woman I was talking to last night had no idea that these kinds of things were happening. No idea that state governments and federal government is funding a lot of programs that serve the entire society simply by taxing that minority who smoke. Now, these are very pernicious policies, unethical policies that poison the entire society. These are not things that just affect smokers. So, you can say, well, I don't smoke, so I don't care. Well, if you could care about our society, a just society, a society where taxes are used not to punish, but to pay the government's bills and not to socially engineer, but again, to pay the government's bills, then these are things that you should be very concerned about, in my opinion, of course. Today on our Facebook page, that is Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights, has a very active Facebook page, and there was an article from Spokane, Washington, where the public health department, it's actually a regional, Spokane Regional Health District, is actually not only encouraging employers not to hire smokers, but has actually set up a whole program where, with a pamphlet instructing employers how they can do this and avoid any kind of legal problems, and not only how they can do this, but how they can monitor the behavior of their employees. If this is not becoming abusive and authoritarian, I don't know what is. And this is, again, this is a country which is supposed to value freedom, individual autonomy, and yet we have tax dollars, many of them coming from tobacco taxes, which are being used directly against smokers and against what it amounts to is against their families also, which makes it, it's kind of almost as if it's North Korea, where if someone commits a political crime, his family is punished along with him. And the reason for this, there's this woman named Paige McGowan, who is the director of the Spokane Regional Health District, and she says one of the reasons to do this is to create an environment where people don't even have to see people who smoke. They don't have to smell secondhand smoke, and they don't even have to see people who smoke, because if they're trying to quit, if they're trying to do the right thing vis-a-vis what the government wants you to do, those of us who continue to smoke and continue to defy medical authorities, we should be quarantined or gotten out of the way. So all of this sounds very Stalinesque, but it's happening today. And again, for those people who are expressing shock that this could happen, they must not have been paying attention, because again, this is something that has been a long time coming, and that federal government, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has been disseminating propaganda specifically for this reason, and also, of course, specifically so that landlords will not will not rent to smokers, or certainly will forbid them from smoking in their own apartments. Even if they're 85 years old, they have to go out in the snow to smoke because of the putative dangers of secondhand smoke that somehow seep through the walls, etc. So this is just another step in punishing smokers, and I really, as again I said, I think it really has less to do with reducing smoking rates than going after that group of people who are non-compliant. After all this time, after all this money, after all these measures have been taken to coerce them to quit, they still continue to do something that is frowned upon. And I think there is a lot of animosity towards those of us who are so non-compliant. The kind of citizen that the people who want to, in my opinion, set up what might be called the public health state, they want a citizenry that is very, very compliant, that will do what they're told, and that don't believe in individual responsibility, individual freedom. And we see this, for example, particularly with people like Cass Sunstein at Harvard, who seems to spend his entire career developing ways to get the citizenry to do what he thinks is in their best interest. not what they think is in their best interest, but what he thinks is in their best interest. And this is something that Dwight D. Eisenhower was often spoken about as, in his farewell speech, he's often remembered for warning the country about the military industrial complex, which is a term that he coined. He also warned about public policy being captured by a scientific, technological elite, like Cass Sunstein, who is determined to manipulate the citizenry to behave in a way that he feels is in their best interest. Not that they feel necessarily, but isn't it better for people to make their own decisions, even if they are considered to be the wrong decisions, than to be without the ability to make the wrong decisions? That is called liberty, that is called freedom, and it is a very, very important thing, and it is basically on what this country was founded. And tobacco goes way back in the supporting the American experiment of freedom and liberty of the individual citizen. Tobacco enabled the colonists to survive. It was a cash crop that they learned how to grow from Native Americans. It funded a great deal of the Revolutionary War. It was one of the first products that the American colonies actually put their own tax on. Prior to tobacco taxes, all of the taxes that were put on the colonies came from England. And so the idea of a United States Constitution, all of these things is very, very dependent on tobacco. So when you say that we want to eradicate tobacco and that tobacco is a curse, etc., etc., one has to realize that without tobacco there would be no United States, no United States Constitution, no revolution against England, and so this is something that we have to recognize and give credit to the place tobacco has played in our history. And now I was looking at some things that I'm constantly trying to bring to people's attention, how bizarre and how counterintuitive or even blatantly false so many things are put out by the anti-smoking movement and by those scientists who basically are employed by them with grants, etc. And for example, one of the things that I saw recently was by just a quote by Stanton Glantz, who of course Paul Neff really dislikes a lot, and he is the director of the Center for Tobacco Control Research and Education at the University of California, where he says, the level of toxicity in cigarette smoke is astronomical compared to other environmental toxins such as particles found in automobile exhaust. So he's saying that cigarette smoke is more toxic than automobile exhaust. Now, anybody with any sense can see that that is blatantly a lie. People will sometimes commit suicide by taking a tube and running it from the engine into their the passenger compartment of the car, and they can die presumably in a very short period of time from the amount of carbon monoxide in it. Likewise, we are constantly reading every winter about people who die from carbon monoxide from malfunctioning space heaters. Yet no one, to my knowledge, who has spent hours upon hours in smoky bars has ever succumbed to secondhand tobacco smoke. Nor in all of the set bars that I went to, which were very, very smoky, in which I spent a great deal of time, did I ever see anybody drop dead of a heart attack from exposure to secondhand smoke. I don't remember ever seeing anybody drop dead of a heart attack in a bar that I was at. Yet, you will hear people with scientific and medical backgrounds saying that secondhand smoke can precipitate a heart attack, or like this gentleman, Stanton Glantz, saying that secondhand smoke is more harmful than automobile exhaust. There was a website I was looking at run by a medical doctor named Lynn Eldridge, and she calls herself a lung cancer expert. And one of the things she says here is, after all, the list of additives in cigarettes is frankly terrifying to someone with a background in chemistry. These additives that are things supposedly the cigarette companies put in their cigarettes that this medical doctor on the internet is saying would horrify someone with a chemistry background. But in point of fact, since 2009, the Food and Drug Administration, which has had authority over tobacco, to my knowledge, has looked at all of these additives and not asked or demanded that any of the tobacco companies remove any of these additives from cigarettes. And why should they? Because most of the additives are very, very things like vanilla and the like that are all in all of our foods and that are vetted by the FDA in many different circumstances. So this idea that the tobacco companies are somehow putting horrific additives in cigarettes, even a lot of smokers believe this, even after the FDA has had authority over tobacco for 6 years, and has not asked them to remove any of them, flies in, to think that these additives are somehow harmful is absurd. And you have people with medical degrees continuing to say it. And to add insult to injury, when you do get a company like American Spirit or Winston, which doesn't have any additives, all the anti-smokers say, well, it doesn't make any difference. You remove all the additives, you have organic tobacco without DDT and all these stuff, and the anti-smokers say it doesn't make any difference. But what would be interesting to me is if anyone has any kind of evidence, any of these anti-smoking groups have any kind of evidence that would indicate that a cigarette without any additives that is made from organic tobacco is in fact not a safer cigarette. Has there ever been a study done on this? And certainly they want to stop American Spirit from even telling the public the truth that it is additive free and organic, because the public will be confused. And of course these people feel that the public is so childish and so unable to determine what is good for itself that they, of course, need the power to regulate almost every decision that the public might be involved in making. That's not freedom. That is not liberty. That is not a citizen who is that's a subject, not a citizen. People who are subjects of this technological scientific elite that Dwight D. Eisenhower warned about. Now, I saw something else here that says studies show that a person breathing secondhand smoke is exposed to the same tar, nicotine, cyanide, and formaldehyde. And, this is another trick they do. First of all, they don't acknowledge that the first and fundamental law of toxicology is that the dose makes the poison. So For example, I am sitting in this room in CCTV, and I'm sure that if you analyze the air in this room, let's say a square or a cubic inch of air, you would find thousands of chemicals that in a strong enough dose could probably kill you instantly. But the dose is so minute, even if you go out in the fresh air, that it has no effect whatsoever. I remember a few years ago they did some kind of study where they found that a very significant percentage, this is probably about 20 years ago, of dollar bills had traces of cocaine on the bill. Well, of course, what that really meant is that they had instruments that were capable of measuring minute particles or quantities of any chemical there is. So what the anti-smokers do is, of course, analyze secondhand smoke, and even though the chemical would probably be there in fresh air too, air without smoke, they can say, oh, we found residues of formaldehyde or whatever these awful sounding chemicals are. Now, it's interesting in this regard also, there's a medical doctor named Paul Offit, who is the director of the Division of Infectious Diseases at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And in an interview transcript with the American Academy of Pediatrics, he was talking about vaccines, and he is one of the people who is very, very gung-ho on vaccines and is extremely critical and belittles any of the people who may have concerns about vaccines. Now, I don't take a position on them, but I do think that the science, this so-called settled science, usually leaves something to be desired. So whereas I don't think vaccines are proven to be a danger, I don't think they're proven to be totally safe either. I think there's room for doubt. But Paul Offit, in defending vaccines, he notes the following: formaldehyde is a product, a natural product. We produce formaldehyde in our bodies every day. So when people who are telling you that secondhand smoke and thirdhand smoke is dangerous because it contains formaldehyde, of course, to the public that sounds very, very scary. But in point of fact, if Offit is being accurate, this is a natural product that is produced in our bodies every day. So this idea that people have to panic because there might be some formaldehyde in secondhand smoke is really, again, a way of tricking people who don't really understand that the dose makes the poison, and that some of these chemicals that have very, very scary sounding names and that may be used in products such as antifreeze or stuff like that are actually naturally occurring and in everyone's body all the time and pose no danger whatsoever. So this is another trick of the anti-smoking groups to foment the fear of people who smoke and the smoke and tobacco, and to vilify tobacco companies. Another item of some interest is that in this Pacific, what I think is actually being referred to, I don't know the exact words of the Pacific Free Trade Agreement, something like that, which I am not really very aware of the details, but it's some kind of free trade agreement that's going in the Pacific, but there is some clause in it that is determined to safeguard people's trademarks, so that even though free trade can go between, I assume China, I assume other countries, and the United States, that companies will have their trademark protected. But from what I understand, the Obama administration wants to exempt tobacco companies from this protection. So again, another attack on a legal industry, an industry that has been very, very important to the development and the continuance of the United States, and yet the Obama administration wants to make it so countries, so that the tobacco industry will not enjoy the protections that these treaties give lots of other companies. And again, it's a First Amendment issue, as I've spoken to you before. A person has a right to have a trademark and to do advertising as long as it is not fraudulent or deceptive. And that is a First Amendment right. And if they can go after the tobacco companies and say that Camel cigarettes cannot put a camel on the package because the camel on the package will somehow, that the American public, or for that matter, the Chinese public, can't resist buying a cigarette because it has a camel on it. This is the height of condescension and the height of arrogance on the part of this scientific technological elite that says only it can determine the decisions that people make. Thanks for watching the smoking section. Every Wednesday, 7 o'clock. Next week, we're going to have Kim Courtney